This is the last leg of this museum tour, which will eventually take us on to the Tift house in a little. Before we go up there, let's see what this is. There's a gigantic brick structure with a chimney. After a few minutes, I realized it was the turpentine still. This is the model we saw in the main building, an entire industry right here. Something going on in here.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome to Variety Works.
Hi. This place looks awesome. I don't know what it is, but...
This is Variety Works. It's an 1890s or early 1900s wood shop.
Yeah.
So it would have been run off this line drive system with the steam engine here, but it takes two people to run the steam engine. One person to shovel and fuel, one person to keep an eye on the gauges. So we have an electric motor that we run it now. So when I turn it on, the shaft in the middle will turn and some of the belts will turn, and then each machine has its own on and off switch.
Cool.
Pull it all the way over so it sticks. And then push it back there so it stays. The on switch. And then yeah, wait for it to engage. So to turn the lathe on, that belt is moving up there. All this lever does is move that pop over to start the lathe. And then we move it back over, it turns it off. And that way you can run every machine in here with the one motor. You can have as many going as you want or as little as you need.
This kind of shop built a lot of stuff in the old days. This shop serves double duty, making period pieces for the museum whilst being an exhibit itself.
The steam engine does still work and we still can run it on like special occasions if we need to. But.
How many implements of woodworking are in here?
So the ones that work are the lathe, the table saw, we have a bandsaw and a planer back there, and then we have a swing cut saw that's on that back wall there. Those are the ones that work that we actually use. We have a shaper there. This is a 3-in-1 machine for making window pane, window frames.
Oh, interesting.
And then we have a joiner that doesn't have a blade in it, and it's a lot bigger than our uses here. So, yeah. And then we have a countless number of tools.
Wow.
Here's where the guy who ran the sawmill would have lived, sparsely furnished like many dwellings of the time, but cozy enough. Imagine living here and it's 1850. It seems lonely, but these communities were pretty bustling with activity, and there would have been plenty of opportunity for socializing. So maybe not so lonely as it may seem. I'm sure he made his own furniture. On to...
So this is the Commissary, also known as the company store. The building was built in 1898 in Vienna, Georgia, and it was owned by a man named Taylor Morgan. So put simply, it was basically a company store for people that worked in the sawmills and the turpentine distilleries. They would get paid exclusively in credit to the store instead of cash. A lot of people went into debt because of this store, though. You may have heard this Johnny Cash song, 16 tons.
My soul too.
Yes, exactly. So that's what this side is about, basically. And you also have a bartering system going on with sharecroppers through the company store. They would negotiate a contract for 1% or a portion of their crop for the coming year in exchange for the credit to actually buy the tools that they needed, because the tools were really expensive. And if they couldn't share with somebody else, they would just do it through credit. And so if they didn't have the crop that they thought they were going to have that year, then they would also go into debt. So it's just a lot of debt with the store. And in relation to the feed-in seed is more for the general public, and it is where you pay with cash. And then here it's more for workers, and you pay with credit.
Gotcha.
So, All the artifacts are out of Jacksonville, Georgia, out of a commissary that was there.
Oh, cool. So it's all authentic.
Yes. And this is actually a ledger book. So this has got some records of some credits and debts of men from the 1890s in Jacksonville. That one's pretty cool.
Wow.
I had to stop by the general store again to buy candy and experiment with the camera placement.
Awesome.
45. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
In the old days, every day's newspaper had to be typeset by hand. This was a job. Maybe it still is, I don't know. They have examples of printing machines as well as printed examples. Like everything else, it was much more laborious in the 1800s. Today we mostly just look at our smartphones, aside from the few who still buy newspapers. And we'll make our way toward the big finish.
This place is a lot more immersive than it looks from the surface. And on the surface it looks like there's a lot to it, and there is. But each place has so much information, you can really only touch on it in a video like this. But we're gonna get to now what I think is kind of the place you end up when you do this, and that would be the Tift house.
The crown jewel of this agricultural museum. This is the kind of house you do see in historic districts. And I don't know how to open the door.
There's clearly a trick to this I do not know. Oh, okay, now I see the sign.
Come on in. Well, here's the Tift house.
We'll let the docents do the
The
talking.
man over the fireplace is Mr. Henry Harding Tift. He is Tifton, Georgia's founding father. And his wife is Bessie Willingham Tift. They are the two people that had the house built in 1887, and it was in downtown Tifton, Georgia, and was moved out here on this site in the early 1980s. So, Miss Bessie Tift, she grew up in Albany, Georgia. So we call her a true Southern belle. So, Mr. Henry Tift, though, he come to South Georgia when he was 40 years old from Mystic, Connecticut.
Ooh.
But Uncle Nelson Tift had already got down here to South Georgia and had a sawmill business going over in Albany, Georgia. So Henry worked for Uncle Nelson for a couple of years. And then he gets over here in this area one day, and he sees all this land that's growing on the virgin trees.
Yeah.
Well, he buys several thousand acres of the land, sets up a sawmill, starts cutting those trees down into lumber, and of course he could sell that to other people, you know.
Right.
So when you see the house, you know Mr. Tift's business was very successful by all means.
Yes. Even by today's standards.
Yes, absolutely. But the pretty wood in this room here, this comes from the sycamore trees. And we still have sycamore trees growing out here on this site today. Wallpaper throughout the house, it is silk wallpaper.
Wow.
not the original, but as near to the original as they could find a company that could make it. And a company in England made the wallpaper for this house. No electricity when the house was built. So the only way they could heat the house was with fireplaces. And there's one in almost every room throughout the house. Now your stained glass in your doors and windows, some of it is original. But we know, as old as this house is, that some of it's been broken and had to be replaced. But to me, it's all very pretty anyway. So.
Yes, it is. Look at the way the sun comes through.
Yes, absolutely. That's when it looks the best, is when the sun is coming through it.
Wow.
It certainly is.
Yeah, the Tift house is gorgeous.
It is. And you know, they did have 3 sons that grew up in this house also. So, but this room here, this is the foyer here. We'll leave this room and we'll come into the parlor right here. Now, all the floors throughout the house, they are pine wood. You know, they had plenty of pine trees growing here in South Georgia, and they certainly did use them by all means, you know. The wood you see in this room now, in your mantle, around your fireplace, this comes from the poplar tree. But poplar is a very light colored wood, so they wanted a dark wood in here, so they just stained the poplar to look like mahogany, you know.
Wow.
So, and their lights, of course, was the oil burning lamps that you see here on their mantle. You know, that's what they had to use for a few years until they could get electricity in the house. And Miss Bessie Tift, she was a church worker, community worker, but the lady was a great artist. She painted the painting over the fireplace. When it come to art, this lady was good. And you know, these other 3 paintings in here, they were done by Miss Tift's art teacher. And of course, she was good too. But I do like the way they hung their paintings. They went up to the crown molding. They did not put a mold in the wall. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, that's very clever. Of course, today we don't, like, at least in apartments, we don't have crown molding to hang from.
That's
but
right. Usually don't have the very tall ceilings like you have in here too, you know.
But that is genius, actually.
It is, it really is. And you know, when the weather was really hot, the only way they could cool the house would be to open up the doors and windows. And this is doors on each side of this room, so you could get very good cross ventilation in this area here. So that's one of the reasons this house has so many doors and windows, because they need it for extra light and for cross ventilation. Some of this furniture actually did belong to Mr. and Miss Tift. Most people, because that's a piano over there, but actually it's a harpsichord. That did belong to Miss Tift. She was the one that played it. It does not have as many keys on it as a regular piano does. I like the fact they use wood for their corner protectors. You know, it protects those corners really well. And it's also very decorative too. But I said one good thing about it, they didn't have plastic when they built this house.
Right.
Now, this is where the family ate all their meals, is right in here. But this is the wood this house is noted for right here. This is curly pine.
Wow.
It come from those pine trees that was several hundred years old. And you know, it wouldn't be like every tree that come through that you would get these curly pine boards from. It might be one tree out of several hundred that come through that you would get these boards from.
Yeah, this would not have been just your every average tree.
And the china on the table, it did belong to Miss Tift. But I said the lady was like all true Southern belles. She wanted her monogram on something, so here it is on those plates. BWT, which stands for Bessie Willingham Tift. So,
That is cool. I like how the wallpaper is like a wall drape.
yes, this is actually my favorite wallpaper throughout the house. the spot where that curly pine wood shows up so pretty is in that mantle around that fireplace. This room here, this is the butler's pantry. Of course, it's a nice storage area, but you know, if they were having dinner parties, the butler would hang out in here and wait on all the guests. Sterling silver piece did belong to Miss Bessie Tift also. Now, this is a big kitchen for anybody's time period, but the house from 1887 did have cold running water. They had the water tower, so when you turn on this faucet over here, gravity would pull the water down, so it's always had cold running water. So the very beginning, you know, so I said probably no house in South Georgia that had it. So.
Yeah, this is a large kitchen.
It certainly is, because when you get those farmhouses, some of those kitchens were just about big enough for one person. You know, this stove was the top of the line stove for that time period. You know, it has the reservoir on this side over here where you could heat your water, you know, right here, this area here. Yeah. And of course, you'd also heat water in the kettle over here too. But your oven here, it does have a temperature gauge. This is where you're going to do your baking, like biscuit, cornbread, baked sweet potatoes, cookies, and lots of other foods, you know. So the top part up here, this is your warming oven up here. Any food that was left over from a meal would have been put up here, you know. And almost always, they would have leftover biscuit up here.
Right.
And you know, they did have the 3 boys. So later in the day, if those boys wants a snack, they could get a biscuit out. The biscuit actually would still be warm. Wow. They turn the biscuit up on its side and take their finger and poke a hole in it and fill it with cane syrup. And they got themselves a pretty good snack.
Nice. Hi, safe.
We do have an 1800s telephone. The switchboard for our phone is in the print shop. You know,
I saw that.
Yeah. So, yeah, most of the time when you go by there, they kind of put it all together and show you how it works.
Right.
So, now this gadget right here, this is an 1800s World's Fair clock. Now the clock doesn't work anymore, but if it did, of course it'd be looking something similar to this right here. It wouldn't be moving quite that fast. But you know, it's still a very interesting piece to look at, even though it doesn't work, you know. So,
Wow.
Hello.
How are you?
Just fine. Welcome to the upstairs.
Thank you.
I'm Lori, and this is 5 bedrooms, but you'll
Wow.
probably heard that there was only 4 people that lived here. And we'll start out in Mr. Tift's, which was very typical of the Victorian era for the man and the woman to have separate bedrooms.
All right.
Mr. Tift, as you can see over the mantel, lumber yard, very typical of the time. Quite a large, that's where he started out. Now, when the Tifts were first married, they lived in an apartment above his office. As soon as he was married, he instructed for this house to be built. So they had to live in the apartment for a year or two. He had shipbuilders from Connecticut come down and build this house, so it's very sturdy.
Wow.
Typical of a man's and Mr. Tift's room being very simple. He was a very simple man, so very giving. He gave a lot to the community here, but he was a businessman. And you can see here there's the washstand where he would wash his face and comb his hair in the morning and shave. Now in the summer they would open the windows and doors for ventilation.
I love the floors, the golden colored
Oh
wood.
yes, yes sir. Most all the furnishings is original. Family members donated back to the house. This is Miss Bessie's bedroom. And as I said, the shipbuilders came down and built it. And if you stand out in the front, it almost looks like a riverboat, like Captain Tift was before he moved south.
Yeah.
And you can see this would be like the bridge of a ship, but I could see Miss Bessie in here painting, you know, a lot of light. Of course, the children always ask about the cradle over there. They did have 3 boys, and she cared for the young ones, but she also had a nanny. Mr. Tift had a valet. He was also a chauffeur.
Nice.
And our carriage driver. This is her wedding suit. I would call it, a Southern girl would call it, a going away suit. And she left on the train. Her and Captain Tift ventured on their honeymoon, extensive 3-month honeymoon, up north to New York. And of course, I'm sure they visited families and so forth. Down the hall, this is what they say the guest room, but my take on it, since they had 3 boys, this was the eldest boy's room. And at that time, school only went to the 8th grade, and if you had money, children went off to boarding school. So I'm sure, you know, he came in and he was off at boarding school from 9th all the way through college. He was away. They did have, once the boys were grown, they had a niece and a granddaughter that came and lived in this house. So we had some girls that lived up here for a while. In the back of the house is the children's 2 bedrooms. You'll notice there's no fireplace. We have 3 fireplaces upstairs, but these had no fireplaces, mainly for safety. And it was above the kitchen, so it was pretty warm anyway.
Right.
And then we have the linen closet there, which they needed for lots of quilts.
Oh, right.
Not many closets at the time because you were charged your taxes.
Taxes, another room,
Of course. This is a reading area. I'm sure at one time the boys used it for study. And then what the children always are interested in is the back staircase. It was used for servants, but it was also used for children or family members that weren't presentable to come in the front door. And this back door leads to the kitchen, the summer kitchen.
Wow. The Tift House. The Georgia Museum of Agriculture. This place is amazing. Well, for the most part, I think that wraps it up. Certainly enough for a 15-minute travel show, but I'm sure we'll be back.